our threatened species. But not only threatened species, there's obviously endemics, and those are species that only occur in South Africa, and then sites as well that are important for congregatory bird species, either on migration routes or just areas where they congregate and breed. And then obviously the overall aim, you can't conserve birds if you don't conserve habitats and the ecosystems in which they occur. So, but what is an important bird area? It's nothing to do with the site that's good for birding or related to birding tourism or anything like that. There are very specific criteria that it's based on. It's similar to the IUCN criteria that define a site. These are internationally agreed criteria that have been developed by BirdLife International and tested all over the world at specific sites. But then also, they must be amenable to conservation action and management. So obviously it makes sense that if you have an area to conserve, it makes sense that it follows existing protected area boundaries if those exist, because obviously it provides the area with formal legislation to protect it. But as well, not only birds are being conserved, birds are indicators quite often of important habitats, and within those habitats are many other types of animal species, different types of biodiversity that are also usually rare and threatened as well. But then the whole idea as well is that through this network that it draws in, all possible people to be involved, whether it's site conservation groups, local conservation partners, and working with people to try and conserve these sites for birds, but also looking at the bigger picture, which is conserving biodiversity. So then just quickly the criteria. We recognize IBAs in South Africa globally as well as regional. So there will be global IBAs as well as regional IBAs. In terms of the global, that would be based on species that have a globally threatened status. And South Africa, the regional red dot, ESCOM red dots book would come into play. So it's all species that are critically endangered, vulnerable, or near threatened that can qualify. And restricted range species as well are considered, and that's generally species that occur within less than 50,000 square kilometers. So they're species that occur in restricted areas. And then assemblages are biome-restricted species. So, for instance, your fynbos endemics and those kind of species that occur within biomes. And then obviously for South Africa, we have quite a big responsibility because of all our unique biome types, the fynbos biome, Namakuru biome, etc., and the species that occur in those areas and occur nowhere else. And then as well, as I mentioned, high concentrations of congregatory bird species. And then there's also, there's kind of levels. So if a site has maybe more than 1% of the global known population of a species, or an area that has a specific amount of congregatory species, and it also works on numbers. And the threshold is normally worked at about 20,000 for global IBAs. So just to show you some examples, martial eagle has a threat status. So if that occurred in an area, Anisna taraka is an example of a restricted range bird species. So they would also be considered in the network. And then as well, your biome-restricted bird species. And within South Africa, there's quite a few obviously associated with the grasslands and the fynbos, as I mentioned, and others as well. And then obviously congregatory species like the lesser flamingo at Campus Dam. And these are just others. So some species can obviously have qualify under more than one criteria, like the yellow-breasted pipit. It's threatened, biome-restricted and range-restricted. Blue swallow is another example. And as well blue crane, congregatory species as well as threatened. So then just some of the sort of main goals. The IBA directory was developed in 1998, and since then very little has actually happened. So we're currently at the stage where we're trying to revive the whole process, which means that we basically need to assess every single IBA in the country, and then from there determine obviously what's going on. As part of that, we plan to publish status and trend reports that show obviously what's happening within these IBAs. But at the end of the day, what we really need to do is obviously prioritize and determine which IBAs are most in need of conservation attention. For instance, areas that are maybe formally conserved wouldn't be a high priority. Maybe more areas that are not formally conserved, or areas that are facing imminent threats. And as part of this program as well, what BirdLife is doing is employing regional conservation managers in all the different provinces, so that they can obviously drive this process. And at the end of the day, assess all of these IBAs, so that, you know, some of them possibly as well, you know, at the moment the Red Dots book's being updated, so a lot of the categories might change. So some IBA statuses might change. We might have to discard some. We might have to then consider obviously including other areas into the network as well. And at the end of the day, is for each species, and it's a mammoth task, and it's quite a difficult task as well, but something that we're chatting about a lot is trying to set targets to conserve species within habitats. And you know, incorporating these targets at the end of the day into conservation planning strategies, and mobilizing people as well to help conserve these sites. We have a huge amount of citizen scientists in the country involved with a lot of projects like SABAP2, which is the South African Bird Atlas projects, etc., trying to mobilize these people within these areas to contribute to the bigger picture, which is at the end of the day everyone cooperating to try and conserve these specific sites. So just briefly, some of the work in KZN, there's 36 IBAs in KZN. Of these, 27 I think are formally conserved. And so the first step, obviously, as I mentioned, is to try and assess all of these IBAs, which we've started with. We hope to have 10 done in KZN now. We've set up a regional conservation IBA conservation committee. And they sort of, once we do the assessment goes to that regional committee. They go through the assessment to make sure they're happy, obviously, with the content. And then from there it goes to a national committee that also approves that, to make sure, obviously, that we are making sure that they have a standard, and obviously that when we do consider the IBA network at the end of the day, that everything's been done properly. So, and then as part of that as well, obviously, we need to conserve sites within the province. So we're involved with a number of projects. One of those is stewardship, and we're involved on Tillietudlem, which is a number of important species on the site, not just birds, oribi as well, some of the dwarf chameleons. So working with the landowners, obviously, to improve the status of the misspelled grassland IBA, which Tillietudlem forms part of as well. The misspelled grassland IBA is one of, it's been in a lot of talks. Obviously, it's one of the least conserved sites in the country. And then as well, we're also involved with a lot of environmental education and awareness work. This was just a day where we took 100 kids from areas in Donnybrook, Kopo, Underberg to the African Birds of Prey Centre, just for a day to obviously expose them to raptors. It was sort of as part of International Vulture Awareness Day that we did that. And then we also involved as sites training Birdguides. This is Becky. He's a trained bird guide based at Lake Sabaya. So the idea is he plays quite an important role within the communities in terms of spreading awareness. He's involved with environmental education. So the idea is obviously to support these bird guides in what they're doing, and obviously try and build capacity so they're helping us monitor the IBA, collect bird data, and that sort of thing. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, I think we caught up a bit of time, so we've got time for some questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Does having an IBA contribute to easing the process of stewardship? Counting
it doesn't really. I mean, it's a network of sites that are chosen using strict